In fact, there's this dude on the internet named Billy Carson. I don't even think he's human. I think he's a melanated reptilian. He gives me Mark Zuckerberg vibes, but dark skin. But anyway, obviously he's a Freemason, just like the 13 Keys dude, or 32 Keys, or whatever in the world. Honestly, there's a lot of them, but that's the video of its own. So anyways, there's this one video where he's saying that, quote unquote, humans used to live forever, but the gods cut our DNA and edited it, and they cut off the capstone or something, and then we couldn't live forever. Really what he's talking about is a gene mutation once Adam and Eve ate the fruit. That's what he's talking about. That's what edited the DNA. It was also interesting because I'm pretty sure he said capstone, and that makes me think back to the whole pyramid thing with the eye and how they want Satan to be the capstone. So Satan wants to be the capstone, but Jesus said he's the cornerstone. And it makes me think of something from back in my day. So there was this movie that had came out, and I don't think I ever got to watch it, but I remember everybody was talking about it. And it got everyone talking. Everyone was talking about 15% of the brain, how people only use 15% of their brain. And the whole point of the movie was, what if people went back to using 100% of their brain instead of 15%? And so this is what Adam and Eve had. They used this 100% instead of 15%. Hebrews created their own enemies. So this is talked about all throughout the Bible, especially in the Old Testament. And it even shows up in the New Testament, especially with this one verse where Jesus was writing in the sand and people were like, how can this man write and read even though he never learned? Because of course the Romans wouldn't allow people to read. And of course the Roman Catholic Church eventually banned the Bible, so they changed them, which I have videos about linked on here from my old channel. But all this happened because Hebrews would try to play buddy-buddy with people, and they wouldn't take out the people that they were supposed to take out. I can also add that they banned the Bible for over 100 years. They wouldn't allow anybody to read the Bible. They wouldn't even let Europeans read. Which has even led to modern issues, especially with the people running around Africa, well, the Scottish and Turkish people running around Africa pretending to be the people. So, Jubilees 1424, and in my notes I put Ishmael, and Hebrews created their own enemies. And wait a minute. I also put 1531 to 32, which that talks about the spirits over different ethnic groups. My note taking is so confusing, but yeah, so anywho, some examples. Hebrews were supposed to take out the Canaanites. They didn't do that. They were supposed to not go along with marrying other people's women and going in to worship their gods. In fact, one of the big things with marrying other people's women is that they would eventually be turned over to worship other people's gods because the women they would get with would convince them to. Just like with the whole situation of Ahab and Samson. Or really, honestly, he just let her take him out. But obviously, if you ask me, he had a situation like David where his family didn't like him and then he started using women to try to cope, just like how people would do the same thing with getting in with men and dating to cope. That's what that situation was, obviously, but still, she let him take him, no, he let her take him out. And then, of course, King Solomon, which that was a very far left situation. So, Jeremiah 51:27 talks about Ashkenaz and Babylon. And, of course, the New Testament talks about the Sadducees and the Pharisees, these groups of people who are in these occultic groups that started trying to merge it with the faith of Yasharel and even what eventually became called Messianic Yahudaism. And they mixed it with the occult, which is where you get these groups that I can't say the name of, that start with K and have 22 paths. And then it didn't end well for them. And of course, all the different slave trades happened and many other things happened. And everything went left for really everybody. And this is a big reason why there's still so much chaos in the now called Middle East, because there's a lot of people there that if the real Yashara would have did what they were supposed to do, wouldn't still be there. Especially when it comes to like the Swedish, Irish, and German people, and Turks. They're also French. They're also, some of them go back to Egypt. Them. They wouldn't have taken over if we wouldn't have been buddy-buddy with people, and if we wouldn't have went into the occult. In fact, they're really the main issue. And Ishmael, that's what I forgot to mention. A lot of Arabs claim they go back to Ishmael. So some of them are Ishmael. Of course, some of them come from other first fathers, but some of them are Ishmael. Palestinians specifically, they're Canaanites, if I can even say that word. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you're trying to be rude. And they're going to like play, I don't know, white savior liberal or something. But for one, Canaan and Cain are two different people. And that's the video of its own. But Palestinians, real Palestinians, they are not Arabs. Arabs are Ishmael and another first father I can't remember. Palestinians are Canaanites. They were in the land before the Arabs started taking over and Islam conquered like a lot of the world and even Europe. And of course, Islam is a branch of pagan Roman Catholicism. They're a branch of Freemasonry, just like Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, the Triple K, a lot of other groups. The whole point of Islam was to combat the true faith of the Yasharel, especially Messianic Yahudaism, or whatever people want to call it. And as far as the Christian label, there's a lot of stuff with that and how it's a European hijacking, but the word Christian was also an insult. And notice they didn't call themselves that. The Europeans called them that. I have the note on here somewhere. Wait a minute. Acts 11:26. Disciples first called Christians by Rome. Of course. Palestinians who do DNA tests, because of course, you know, like, in this area it's hard for anybody to really get a DNA test, especially when it comes to the whole European situations. It's actually illegal for those Swedish, Irish, German, and French people to get a DNA test, but Palestinians will tell you they have pure Canaanite DNA. Those are the people that were in the land before true Yasharel went in there. But of course, there's also another side, which is that there was giants too. So a lot of the Canaanites that Yasharel did take out were the giants. But they left a lot of the people. And Ishmael wouldn't have ever even been born if there wouldn't have been a whole bunch of lack in faith and bullcrap going on. So overall, Hebrews created their own enemies. That's the whole point. Honestly, that's like one of the big points in the Bible, even in the Apocrypha. I also noticed that there's a lot of Esau talk, and all these people are not Esau. I mean, sure, the Swedish, Irish, and German ones, but I mean, think about people like Jimmy Iovine. Obviously, he's not Esau, but there's just a lot I could say about that, because we all know Ashkenaz comes from Japheth, but there's like a lot of acting like everyone's Esau, and that's just like not reality. I actually have some notes somewhere. I haven't found the notes I'm looking for, but I did find this, and I just want to throw this in here, and for people to just hold this thought while I keep looking for the notes I'm actually looking for. Jubilees 8:3. Fallen angels creating religions, cave drawings, which I was gonna actually put that in with the Gravity Falls breakdown. I forgot all about that actually. This was December 2, because I never keep my promises. Anywho, actually, Jubilees 8:8, because I have two notes. Shem, Cush, Ham, land divided, Japheth got cold climate. Cush. Cush is the real Egyptians. The Cushite kingdom was Egypt and Ethiopia, which actually, okay, hold that thought and then hold another thought, because there's something else I want to throw in. I'm going to be all over the place. Okay, there's about to be a lot. Also, some of the Sudanese are Kush as well. Kush was actually, like, really, really big, because Ethiopia used to be bigger. The Indian Ocean used to be called the Ethiopian Ocean. A lot of thoughts to hold. I gotta look for it. So, the point of me saying that, all the people you see in the mainstream claiming to be Egyptians are not Egyptians. They're Ishmael and other Arabs, or they're Canaanite, or they're those specific group of Europeans, which are always claiming to be a lot of things that they aren't. Some of them even claim to be the Native Americans. And of course, I know people try to flip it back and talk about how they're like, how somebody can't be an American Aboriginal and be in Yasharel. Now, me personally, I don't even claim the American Aboriginal side, but there were Shem and Kush specifically American Aboriginals. And this is of course separate from the Asian natives, which are also Ham, just like the Kush, but they didn't look like the Kush ones. So there were different natives, and then there were what people now like to call the quote-unquote Black American Aboriginals. So there were ones from Shem, which means that they would also be Yasharel, which also just like the whole Moor thing. But a lot of the Moor ones, those are people like Malcolm X, the ones that were in Messianic Yahudaism at one point, but then eventually they got scared and converted into Islam, which is a branch of Freemasonry, which is why you'll notice that these dudes are always Prince Hall, and they're used to brainwash Yasharel. But we don't even think about the fact that these dudes like Malcolm X and that boxer dude honestly don't even look like a lot of us. And they're also in a different faith than most of us. But we just, I mean, like usual, they were just puppets. They're honestly no different than the rapper dudes, but that's a video of its own as well. Apocryphal Esther, 13:1. Artaxerxes reigned from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. So keep that in mind, because like this quote-unquote Middle East and Africa stuff has really just been so flipped around throughout the years. This is also why you'll hear about the Roma gypsies, which don't get it confused because there's also some Europeans that say they're Roma gypsies. But they don't look like, well, I guess they got lighter, I don't even know. It's like a lot of mess because supposedly the gypsies are like, or the Roma, they're supposed to be Indians, but there's also some more really Greco-Roman looking people or Europeans that say that they're the people that also just so happen to be in some weird Christian sect. But push them to the side and maybe think more about the more Indian looking ones. They're said to go back to Egypt. I've even seen some videos of Indians saying, well, we're black. Which honestly, don't even get caught up in the whole black label. Honestly, no one should do that. But it's like all of a sudden now they're black. But of course, the Negroids who don't want to be considered Negroid or fall under the black label, which all Negroids weren't even considered black. Africans weren't even considered black. Black was used for certain people specifically. But anyways, the Negroids who don't want to be considered Negroid would go under Mongoloid, which is considered Asian. And I know people are going to feel some type of way, but these were the original racial labels that were made, or some of them anyway, before people fell into the whole black-white stuff. It was Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid. And all the... Another thing I can add in is that Negroid and Negro are not the same thing. Negro is a specific term for the Yasharel. Negroid is a racial label. Negro goes back to an actual ethnic group. That's why these Malcolm X people had pushed for us to go over to the black label and told us that Negro is an insult. Not that somebody should really necessarily be called that, but it honestly really wasn't. Negroids that didn't want to be considered Negroid would consider themselves Asians. So like, technically, with how this worked, Mexicans would be considered Asian. Although some of them, the ones with more Spaniard DNA, which is European, would be considered white. But then there's still the whole thing where, with the real white supremacists at the top, this specific group of Europeans making the white label, there was even more uproar between Eastern Europeans and I think, what was it, Eastern and Southern? Northern? I don't even remember. I think it was Eastern and Northern. There was the whole true Caucasian versus other ones. So like, the ones that really have more Neanderthal DNA versus the other ones. There was a whole situation where the Greeks and the Romans considered the tribes with blonde hair to be barbarians, which is very interesting due to the fact that the Greeks and the Romans were into what they were into and all the traumatizing children stuff. But they considered the people with blonde hair barbarians, which makes you wonder. But of course, they all ended up eventually teaming up anyways. Also, after these specific group of Europeans stole America, or now called America, and other places, and immigration started to roll in, Swedish, Irish, and German people and other groups had to give up their culture to fall under the white label. So the white label was a very American thing, which of course is a purity label. So the Irish and the Scottish people and other groups, they had to stop knowing how to dance and sing. We also know that Moses was a Cushite king, and Joseph married Asenath, an Egyptian, what was she, a princess, I think? Jubilees 39, Joseph was 17, and 46:3, Joseph ruled Egypt under Pharaoh for 80 years. And I'm looking for the verse about the half-tribes. Oh no, because I skipped it. Okay, let me go back. Jubilees. Oh my gosh, why do I take notes like this? I don't even know what happened. I'm gonna say 39 something, but I also see 84 beside it, but I see 8 and 2 4s. I don't know what happened here, but something like that. Ephraim and Manasseh were two tribes that were half tribes, and they were half Egyptian. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't really talk about whether Potiphar and Asenath were the Cushite Egyptians or another type. But yeah. We also know that Moses married an Egyptian, which of course the religious organizations try to make you think that like people were mad at him because he married somebody who was quote unquote black. Even though with what the black label was made for and who was made for, the Egyptians wouldn't even be considered black. In fact, Africans and really all other groups, they come to America and they label themselves off as white on the census. But that's kind of besides the point. They try to make it like a racial thing, or quote unquote racial, because black and white isn't a race. But it's interesting since they claim that the Egyptians were quote unquote white anyways. So yeah, still looking for the notes. But another verse while I'm looking, Maccabees 1:38. Jerusalem trodden down by Gentiles due to Israel's sin, as usual. And this is also talked about in Revelations, of course, how Jerusalem will be trodden down by Gentiles till the time of the end, the very end. Genesis 41, 51-52, the Cush/Egyptian half-tribes, sons of Joseph. And going back to Freemason plans to confuse Yasharel, every time we get close to the truth and drag us off way somewhere else on the deep end, the Rashad Jamal guy, who obviously is a Freemason as well, similar to the Billy Carson dude and the 13 or 22 Keys guy. There's this part in the Book of Giants, chapter 2, and then I put 4Q 531 because I think that has something to do with like how it's set up. These fallen angels are the quote-unquote 12 scientists Rashad Jamal talks about. This also makes me think of something else. How people would say that the Illuminati isn't really a group and they were just scientists. Honestly, neither one of those things are true. It's not a group and it's not scientists either. These 12 scientists are some of the main highest ranking angels, including Lucifer/Zeus, which fell from heaven and convinced other angels to fall. And they also made the hybrids and stuff, which is why they're called quote-unquote scientists, because they were doing genetic modification and alchemy/witchcraft, and they taught people how to make makeup and different things that these days would be called science. But that whole 12 scientist thing, At the time of the false Yasharel and the Egyptian pagan mix, and people not accepting the Messiah, as well as the overreach of Rome, which eventually became the pagan Roman Catholic Church. This one right here was kind of funny, so I'm going to just throw this in here. When Paul said, I wish the people preaching circumcision would go ahead and cut off everything. Just cut the whole thing off. Another thing, Acts 23. Sadducees don't believe in the supernatural or resurrection, but the Pharisees do. Amos 5:26, the false Star of David doctrine. And like I said, the way I take my notes, or at least I took the notes at this point in time, are really confusing. And I think what it was is that I didn't have this calendar book, so I was taking my notes on a piece of paper, and I was just trying to fit everything on there. So it's hard to really know which book what is from unless I go back and look. And then I eventually got the calendar and moved everything over, but I forgot about that issue. But anyways, Dan 4:19, no, oh my gosh. Dan 6-9, first end of the world. This also makes me think back to the whole thing where after the pagan Roman Catholics had hung Jesus on the cross with the real Yasharel and all the different mixing of people, what happened was they started time over because, of course, the Catholics, they control the calendars. And I have videos about that linked on here from my old channel. Ezekiel 13:19, when prosperity gospel came in. Then I also put 34:1-13. Jeremiah 51:7, all religions come from Babylon. And 51:27, Ashkenaz in Babylon. Ezekiel 8:16, I put Islam with a question mark beside it. Aside from us having the curses of Deuteronomy 28, Matthew 27:24, Hebrews and others curse themselves, but specifically Hebrews. Jeremiah 9:15, I think. Because I can't really see this. But then I also put Adam and Eve. Like I said, my note taking is all over the place. But Jeremiah 9:15, how Hebrew communities get the worst food, of course. 9:21, kids will die in the streets as judgment. This was from a Birth of Democracy video I seen in a history class. This goes on with the whole Prince of Persia thing. The Birth of Democracy video is talking about how the Prince of Persia, which also represents a principality, swallowed up a lot of the Middle East, forming a superpower, which also makes me think back to how Nebuchadnezzar was trying to become God and eventually take over the whole world. Revelation 16:19, people wouldn't repent. 21:14, God's NWO versus Satan's NWO. Revelation 2:14-16. At least that's what I have at the top. Don't. Pergamum and all the other churches are located in the Caucasus Mountains, where the serpent seed Khazars come from. This explains Revelation 2:9, Revelation 9:7. Seems like the Prince of Persia's Gnosticism, which is, I don't even think I could say this word, but TALM, Judaism. And this was just a note that I wrote, so something I was thinking about anyways. But as far as like the churches, I did do research on where those locations were, and that is the Caucasus Mountains. And here's something interesting I noticed that I forgot all about, that I wrote about in my notes. This is February. So Revelation 11:1-14, the two witnesses. And I was thinking about it and I was like, well, it sounds like they're gonna be among the fake ones, ministering to them. Once they bring their Messiah, it doesn't sound like the two witnesses are really going to be for the true Yasharel. I mean, sure, they're going to be for like the whole world, but it sounds like they're specifically going to be there to try to minister to the fake ones. Which, I mean, it would make sense, because it's like, I mean, it doesn't sound like we're going to be in the land by then. So yeah, that's what I got out of that. And then it says 12 is about the tribes of Israel. I was supposed to be avoiding that word. And the birth of Jesus, Lion of Judah. It mentions how Satan tried to keep Jesus from being born, 12:14. The manger, 3:15. 3:15, the first beast, isn't a living thing. 14, I think that's what this says. Reborn warriors from the 12 tribes. Oh yeah, so I'm assuming that some of what I was talking about here was about the constellation thing with the beast that tried to swallow up the woman on the beast, something like that. So yeah, that's about the 12 tribes, which of course, the flipped around version of the Bible in the gospel and everything taught in the religious organizations really makes all this stuff about the 12 tribes and really everything more confusing than it has to be. The notes I was looking for that I now can't find for whatever reason was about how the Amorites had mixed with the Amalekites, and so they were like fallen beings. And that was going to go into the whole thing about how, like, I noticed people are trying to act like all Caucasians or whatever Esau, and I don't really know where this came from. Some of their curses are mentioned. Well, no, the whole book of Obadiah is about them and how, like, them and the groups that they mix with, they're going to be trying to, like, go to outer space. As you see, they're trying to colonize Mars and stuff. That's in Obadiah. Genesis 15:16. The sin of the Amorites is not yet full. And this also goes into how there's a set amount of sin people can do before judgment. Which I think Paul specifically also talked about with the clay and the potter. And I think some verses after that, or maybe some chapters after that, he talked about how certain people get more grace than others. Especially when it comes to, like, someone who knows what's right and was doing good, going over to do evil is going to get less grace than somebody who's, like, been doing mess. And then Genesis 19:13, there's a threshold of sin people can commit before Yah intervenes. Also a certain type. And the group that starts with the K and ends with Allah pushes human torture and CSA and things like that because they believe that the only way to get the Creator to come back is by doing more and more evil, and they want him to come back so they can fight him, which is what the end times Armageddon war is about, or one of the wars. But there's also the ones that like the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and fighting for the 12 tribes who were scattered and to bring them back together, which has also been very misconstrued. Like when people think of Armageddon, they think of like the US fighting UK and the UK fighting Middle East. They think of like a different war that has nothing to do with Jack. Or they just think about zombies and aliens, which that's not it either. And then lastly, we know the scientists say that the universe expands forever and it grows every day. How they would know this, we don't know. But honestly, it makes sense because we do know that at least different dimensions expand and grow. And we know specifically that hell expands and grows every day. So that's one dimension we know grows. And there's a verse in there somewhere about that.